Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today I have 4 true ghost stories from the Haunted Canada series. If I pronounce anything wrong, I do apologize. An imaginary friend, Montreal, Quebec. It's not uncommon for small children to have imaginary friends. When parents find their sons and daughters talking to an empty space, they know their child is simply going through a normal phase in life. There's certainly nothing unusual or creepy about it, unless, of course, you one day begin to believe the supposed imaginary friend might not be imaginary after all, that the child is actually speaking and playing with someone from beyond the grave. Newlyweds Kylie and Pete moved into their first home without any clue that something was amiss. It was the end unit of a row of houses on Georges Vanier Street in Roxborough, a neighborhood in Montreal. They were excited to start their married life together, and their heads were filled with dreams of what the future might hold. New experiences, new careers, children. It was very exhilarating. The house was admittedly small and ugly, but that didn't bother Kylie too much. It was all they could afford at the time, and she knew it wouldn't be their forever home. But if she was simply completely honest, there was something not quite right about the house on Georges Vanier Street. Something she couldn't put her finger on. Even one of her best friends picked up on the bad vibe every time she visited. In fact, the friend hated coming over and told Kylie certain there was some sort of presence in the house. But life went on, and they put such thoughts out of their minds. Soon they welcomed their first child, Gareth, into the world and brought him home. It was a happy time as Gareth grew and laughed and learned to crawl and walk and talk. And then, when Gareth was 18 months old, something unusual began to happen. Kylie found her son sitting on the bottom step of the staircase one day, looking up and talking to something. Kylie looked upstairs, but no one was there. She asked Gareth who he was talking to. "My friend," young Gareth replied. "Duke." Kylie was surprised by the answer. Not only was this their son's first imaginary friend, but the name was unusual. Why Duke? They didn't know anyone named Duke, and there weren't any Dukes in any of the books or shows they read and watched together. The days passed, and Gareth spent more and more time with Duke. "Come here, Duke," he would often say, leading his imaginary friend through the house. "Come with me, Duke." Often, when grown-ups would move to sit on the family room couch, Gareth would wave his arms wildly and yell, "Don't sit on Duke!" The bemused adults would willingly sit on the other side of the couch, looking at the empty spot beside them. But was that spot actually as empty as the grown-ups believed? Kylie thought so, but her opinion would soon change. One day, while visiting with a neighbor who also lived on Georges Vanier Street, Kylie casually mentioned that her son had an imaginary friend. As she elaborated and shared more details, her neighbor's eyes grew wider and wider. When Kylie revealed that the imaginary friend's name was Duke, her neighbor turned pale and finally spoke. "Before you moved in, an old lady used to live in your home," the neighbor said softly with a silent quiver in her voice. "There was a fire. The old lady and her dog died in the blaze. The dog's name, Kylie. His name was Duke." Everything suddenly made sense. Bone-chilling, hair-raising sense. Gareth encouraging Duke to come down the stairs. Gareth patting his leg and telling Duke to come with me. Gareth insisting that no one sit on Duke. His imaginary friend wasn't imaginary. He was a dog. A dead dog. Gareth continued to talk and play with the ghost dog that only he could see until the day they moved out. When he was 3 years old, Gareth never saw Duke in their new house. The spirit had remained in the home where he had died, and Gareth never spoke of Duke again. In fact, now grown up, he no longer recalls having ever had an imaginary friend, ghost or no ghost, but his mother remembers only too well. The next time you see a small child speaking to an empty corner of a room or an unoccupied chair, they might be playing with an imaginary friend. But it's also possible that the child might be making friends with an animal or person whose time on earth has come to an end, at least in the physical sense. The Pit of Despair, Dawson City, Yukon. The sky was gray and lifeless. The early morning sun was concealed behind a thick layer of clouds. The dirt road outside the Westminster Hotel was quiet. A figure walked alone. The solitary figure was a mother who had come to see her son. He was a cleaner who worked the night shift at the Westminster Hotel. She walked slowly and hesitantly into the main floor lounge known as the Armpit and looked around. Not only was there no sign of her son, but she couldn't see another soul there. She called out. Her voice echoed across the room. No one replied. She slowly made her way deeper into the lounge. Then she heard something from the other side of the hotel. The mother passed through a back passage that was filled with dust, cobwebs, and boilers, and approached a door to the bar, the Snake Pit. As she neared it, the sounds grew louder and became clearer. She could hear men's voices, talking, cajoling, and laughing, and over the chatter was a distinctive clinking of poker chips. Had her son let his friends in for a game of cards when he was supposed to be working? The mother barged into the tavern and was met with the sight of another empty room. The sounds of the poker game, so clear when she was in the boiler room, stopped abruptly. Wide, tall, and painted baby pink, the Westminster Hotel has a bright and cheery face, but looks can be deceiving. Established in 1898, during the peak of the Klondike Gold Rush, the Pit, as locals affectionately call it, has seen its fair share of history. Some of it has never left. Aaron Burney, who works and lives in the Westminster Hotel, has witnessed no shortage of scary experiences he can't explain. He asserts that there is definitely something in the pit, and he's not talking about the guests who visit the historic hotel to enjoy the rustic charm of its sloping ceilings and crooked floors. One night he woke and needed to use the bathroom. All seemed normal until he made his way back to his room. Inexplicably, the hallway felt substantially colder, like he had entered a meat freezer. That gave him the creeps, but his next few experiences were far creepier. After another trip to the second-floor bathroom, Aaron was washing his hands when the locked door handle began rattling rapidly and loudly. Someone was trying to get in. "I'll just be a sec," Aaron called out. He quickly dried his hands, opened the door, and found the hallway to be completely empty. Only 3 seconds had passed since someone had jiggled the handle. There was no possible way a living human being could have disappeared from the hallway so quickly. Not long after, Aaron finally caught a glimpse of the ghost he had previously only felt and heard in the upstairs hallway. A man wearing a fedora hat, whom he'd see again and again, usually out of the corner of his eye. Others have seen him too, but the knowledge isn't necessarily comforting. The spirit is protective of the lounge's piano. One day when Aaron was relaxing in the Armpit, he saw a cell phone fly off the piano and across the room. The Globe and Mail newspaper voted the Westminster Hotel the best venue in Canada for live music. If that's something you'd enjoy, you'll want to plan a visit soon. And if you prefer dead guests to live music, you also won't be disappointed. Terminus of the Dead, Vancouver, British Columbia. Experts believe that Waterfront Station might be the most haunted building in Vancouver, a city with such a bloody history that one of its streets is literally named Blood Alley. Built in 1915 by the Canadian Pacific Railway to serve the needs of a city that was growing rapidly, Waterfront Station was the Pacific terminus for trains traveling across the country from Montreal and Toronto. Since then, it has also become a terminus for the dead. It's a grand building, built in a style reflective of the luxury and prestige that used to be so synonymous with train travel. In its early days, it contained accommodations for weary travelers as well as fine dining restaurants, a dance hall used for upper-class parties and balls. Today, some of these rooms are occupied by offices, while others are used for storage, such as a room full of desks that have a habit of silently moving on their own. On a dark, cold night, a security guard working the night shift prowled through the wide, empty hall of Waterfront Station. His footfalls echoed off the stone walls as he swung his flashlight from side to side. He was alone, or so he thought. As he entered one of the building's storage rooms, in order to search the room, he had to swivel his large frame around the old desks that were stored there. When the guard reached the back of the room, he turned and was paralyzed with fear. The desks had silently floated off the ground and repositioned themselves. Some blocked the door while others were piled in the middle of the floor, forming a crude blockade that had cut him off from his only means of escape. Not only was he trapped, but he couldn't comprehend how that had happened. There was only one explanation. The ghostly tales of Waterfront Station his co-workers had shared were true. A ghost, or perhaps a host of ghosts, had ensnared him in the room. But for what purpose? The security guard didn't wait around to find out. He ran full speed toward the desk, leaped up on one of the nearest ones, and sprinted across them to the door, eager to put the haunted room as far behind him as quickly as possible. Between 2004 and 2005, a guard heard phantom footsteps in a stairwell on 3 separate occasions. The first time it happened, the feet approached so quickly and unexpectedly that the guard barely had time to think before the sound ran past within half a meter of him. The second time, he was a little more prepared and stood in mute horror as the sound of someone running passed by, once again without a visible body. The third time, the guard was not alone. He was with a colleague who also heard the footsteps, proving to him that the sound was not a product of his imagination. One night, a different guard wandered toward the west side of the building where the dance hall used to be located. As he got closer, he slowed his pace. He heard something. It was faint at first, but it grew louder as he approached. It was the sound of music from the 1920s. That didn't make sense. The station's sound system wasn't connected. When the guard finally entered the old ballroom, the music was so loud he thought he had just stepped back in time and into the middle of a swinging party. At first, the room appeared to be empty, but then out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a solitary figure, a woman dressed in a 1920s flapper dress, waltzing alone across the floor in time with the music. The guard took a step toward the woman, but suddenly the music stopped and the woman vanished on the spot. On another occasion, a guard opened a door and walked into a dark storage room, completely unprepared to come face to face with the old woman staring back at him. She glowed bright white and had a look of sadness and pain etched upon her face. The woman floated and reached her hand out to him, which sent him running in the opposite direction. Others have also rounded a corner to find 3 women sitting on a bench as if waiting for a midnight train. Like the dancing specter, they disappear almost as soon as they've been spotted. And it's not only security guards who have seen ghosts in Waterfront Station. Many employees who work in the offices have had their fair share of unwanted paranormal encounters. Deborah Loomis, a senior account executive, recalls the time she was speaking with another employee in one of the bathrooms when a third woman suddenly and creepily joined them. The stranger had a wavy brown hair that flowed over her shoulders and wore a glamorous blue blouse from a different time period. She stared silently at Deborah for an awkward 10 seconds, then whispered in an ethereal voice, "I'll come back another time," and promptly vanished. And finally, no account of the spirits of Waterfront Station would be complete without the headless brakeman, who had been seen prowling on the tracks on a night in 1928 as the rain was coming down in sheets. An unfortunate CPR brakeman named Hub Clark was working outside when he slipped and landed on his head. The fall rendered him unconscious, and he lay sprawled across the tracks. A passenger train sped toward him before Clark regained consciousness, and he didn't see it coming. His head was cut clean from his body. It wasn't long before other CPR employees began seeing Clark step out of the shadows on misty nights. A lantern held high in the air. He walks up and down the tracks through the dead hours, forever searching for his missing head. Last stop, Waterfront Station. End of the line. It's time to get off the train. But if it's late and you have a bad feeling in your gut, no one would blame you for wanting to stay on the train a little longer. Some of Waterfront Station's travelers have yet to reach their final destination. The Living Museum, Edmonton, Alberta. The Karpez family purchased a beautiful home on Saskatchewan Drive and decided to spruce it up a little before moving in. Named the Firkins House after the original owner, it was well known to neighbors as the dwelling of some dark presence. But the Karpetsis had no idea very soon they would. Shortly after taking possession of the possessed house, Audrey Karpetz worked late into the night painting one of the upstairs bedrooms. However, the spirit that inhabited the home's walls must not have appreciated the change in decor. Exhausted but satisfied with the day's work, Audrey, alone in the house, switched off the upstairs light and turned to leave. As she approached the top of the stairs, she was suddenly grabbed from behind in a tight and frigid embrace. She fought free from whatever had latched onto her body and ran outside as quickly as she could. When she found the courage to look back at the house, she saw that the upstairs lights had turned back on. The rational part of her brain calmed her fears and reminded her that she had been alone. The logical explanation was that her mind was playing tricks on her. She must have imagined the touch of the hands and accidentally left the lights on in her haste to get out. She must have. Filled with newfound but slightly shaky confidence, Audrey walked back into the house and up the stairs. She switched off the light and turned to leave. Something grabbed her from the darkness, just as before. This time, Audrey didn't try to convince herself it was only her imagination. The embrace of the hands was far too real. She screamed and ran out of the house. Once outside, she saw that, much to her horror, the upstairs light and had once again turned back on. She locked the door and left. Upon returning the next morning, Audrey and her husband Rod found that the upstairs light had been turned off at some point during the night. The Karpetzis still moved into the house as planned, hoping the ghostly counters would stop. They didn't. Late one night, Audrey returned home with her 2 young daughters. She tucked the sleeping girls into their beds and went downstairs to the kitchen. There, sitting at the table, like he owned the place, was an old man she didn't recognize. After overcoming her initial fright, Audrey asked the man what he was doing in her house. She assumed he must be a friend of her husband's or a neighbor she hadn't yet had the opportunity to meet. But the man didn't answer. She rubbed her eyes, and when she looked at the table again, the man had disappeared without a trace. In 1992, Rod and Audrey Karpetz sold the house, and it was transported to the Fort Edmonton Park, Canada's largest living museum. Located along the North Saskatchewan River, the park takes visitors through time, from the fur trade era, the settlement era, the municipal era, to the metropolitan era. Throughout the summer, the park is filled with costumed historical interpreters who interact with visitors. And for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, the Hotel Selkirk is fully operational, allowing people to stay in the park overnight. The legend of the haunted house in the Living Museum has grown over the years, making it hard to decipher the truth. People have reported seeing a transparent woman floating near a bookcase in the study, even claiming to have captured her in pictures. Others tell the story of a previous owner who repeatedly found a creepy ventriloquist doll that turned up in odd places throughout the house, as if it had a life of its own. Listen closely in one of the upstairs bedrooms that used to be a nursery, and you might hear a disembodied voice singing lullabies as if to soothe the baby. And many people have reported seeing a boy running through the halls, bouncing a red ball in such a carefree manner that it seems he doesn't even know he's dead. There are so many reputable people who have seen odd phenomena that the reports are impossible to ignore. Take, for example, the workers who were tasked with the building's restoration and installation in Fort Edmonton Park. Their tools kept disappearing and reappearing in bizarre spots as if they had grown legs. A window pane flew out of a second-floor window frame, and despite being glass, didn't shatter or crack when it hit the ground below. It seemed like it had been guided softly down to the ground. It made no sense. A security guard who worked the night shift in the park for years had countless odd experiences when he was presumably all alone. He says that once the spirits got to know him, he was mostly left alone. His two most vivid and chilling memories from within the Firkins house include one night when he saw a chair slide from one side of a room to the other, and another night when he was pushed violently from behind. Have you decided whether or not you'd want to spend a night at the Hotel Selkirk, so close to the Firkins house? Well, before you book a room, consider this. A tourist who stayed overnight wandered through the park after it had closed and filmed the historic buildings. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at the time. But when he reviewed the footage a few days after his trip, he couldn't believe what he had captured. The video showed that he was alone in the middle of the moonlit street. The camera was focused on the Firkins house, and then a faint voice clearly whispered, "Come see," followed by the piercing squawk of a crow. The choice is yours. Visit Fort Edmonton Park during the day or spend a night sleeping beside one of the country's most haunted houses. It's sure to be a night you'll never forget. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking to my channel, and I will see you on the next one.